Gatorade.
Oh, okay.
Drinking Gatorade. Okay.
Zero sugar Gatorade, but.
And we're live. Everybody, how you doing?
Hey, good to be here.
Yeah, I'm doing great.
Okay, well, let's let me share just links real quick, and then you guys kind of shoot this for a little bit while I get the links tweeted out.
Well, Andrew, I'll just ask you preliminary questions because I have a lot of affection for Augustine, and I know that you're an Augustinian. I'll just say that my path to reversion started with Augustine, so I really, really like him. So I want to know, how did you first encounter Augustine?
In college, actually.
Yeah, me too.
I first studied the Augustine in college. I had a whole class on church history, and it was really, really excellent. When we got to Augustine, that was very formative for me because like my entire ideology is kind of based on Augustine, and particularly his concept of the Trinity. So So I mean, that was the point. I know that was like a dividing line for me. Is like once I understood the Trinity and before and after, because after is like everything just clicked into place. I remember the moment where everything was just clicking into view, and it was just amazing. So he was extremely formative. Like there's no archotropism, there's no anti-tax, there's nothing I'm known for is there without Augustine.
Awesome.
Yeah, Augustine.
What about you?
Yes. I haven't. I've read, I think, a lot of excerpts from him because I did a philosophy course on early medieval philosophy. So we studied three specific Catholic thinkers. We studied Augustine, Boethius, and Abelard. And Augustine was the first one, and he just blew me away. We also studied a few Islamic and Jewish thinkers, but the main focus of course, was on the Catholic ones. And they gave us this big book, which was just, I think it's like 1,000 pages long, which is just excerpts from all of these thinkers from, their most important works. So there's stuff on the Trinity, there's stuff from City of God, there's stuff from his dialogue on free will, which was the thing that really made me think of him as a, not only this passionate speaker, because I had first read the Confessions, but as a really great philosopher. You could say both God foreknows everything and there is free will, and explain it in a clear manner. And in the Confessions, where he explains that every vice, every misuse of something is you're misusing a good that should be rendered unto God. So I can actually give a quote that this is the quote that really blew me away, where he explains that, for example, for pride mimics loftiness when in fact you are the one God most high above all things. And he goes on through the list of like cruelty. Cruelty is meant to inspire fear, but who's to be feared except the one God? He goes through lust. And what are the enticements of a lustful are meant to arouse love, but nothing is more enticing than your charity, and no love is more wholesome than the love of your capital T, truth, which surpasses all things in beauty and splendor. So he goes on through the list of all these possible sins, and he ends with, thus the soul commits fornication when it turns away from you and seeks outside you those things that it cannot find pure and unadulterated unless it returns to you.
Yeah,
That's
that
great passage.
That is excellently put. That is one of my favorites, because that's where I get the idea that that all sin is not love. Anything that's not love is sin, because God is love. And so, and you can and once you put it in that context of we're supposed to be loving our neighbors as ourselves, and any action that is sin is definitionally not love, or somehow definitionally distinct from love. It's like it just everything clicks into place. Like, oh, now it all makes sense. And it doesn't sound, and sin is no longer arbitrary, which is the problem for a whole lot of other because they're not explaining it. They're not explaining the commonality between it, between what these sins all have in common. They just say like, oh, it misses the mark. And it's like, because sin is an archery term, and it's like, oh, it means to miss the mark. What's the mark? I mean, it really begs the question, what's the mark? And they never explain that. And and then it kind of leaves a lot of people thinking that the definitions of sin and like why certain acts are sin and why they're not is completely arbitrary, when it's not arbitrary at all.
It's continue.
I use a much
Well,
more precise language when I'm talking about Augustine's thoughts, but
Mhm.
than he does. But he's like 4th century A.D.
Mhm.
It's a lot more.
Yeah.
I'm in the scientific age, so
Yeah, exactly. But there is a certain poetry to his thought. He's a very good writer, I find, especially his letters. There's such a, I think Art of Christendom on Twitter made this point.
well,
There's
beauty is an aspect of love.
Yeah, but there's such an earnestness to him. He feels like, when he sends a letter to his mom from university, it's so relatable. He's like so excited. He meets people, and there's this he's so honest. He's so
Yeah.
honest and earnest in the confessions, and you could just see it bleeds from him what he's writing. He's a great writer.
Mm-hmm.
Real quick, Andrew, I gotta say, I think the background you have is an improvement from the "Don't
Yeah.
Tread on Me" flag to the Saint Michael. Definitely an improvement.
I mean, I saw it in the mall a few weeks ago, and I'm like, I need that on my wall. It's like, I mean, Saint Michael to pulling a Derek Chauvin on Satan. I'm like, oh my god, yes, nothing more based.
Yeah, that's a great painting. So let's get into this. Real quick, if you could lay out your Austro-Thomism. I know it takes a while to kind of lay it out, but let's see if you can just lay out your Austro-Thomism real quick if you can.
The basic there's 3 basic definitions. I'll give you 2. The idea of Archotropism is how the state forms and derives its power. And basically there's you've probably all noticed by now, particularly if you've been living in the last 2 years, that the state has a mechanism where it seeds chaos in order to power grab from it, using the promise that they're going to restore order. They never do, and if they do, it's usually a fraud, of some sort. So it's like, but they still get the power and they still keep it that way. And the second definition is basically the praxeology of how the first one works. So when I say archotropism, I can either be referring to like kind of the economics of power, quote, quote, or I can be referring to that chaos power order cycle that a lot of people have talked about for a long, long time. I finally just gave it a name instead of calling it chaos power order. That doesn't it doesn't quite flow off the tongue. Archotropism does, though. And it literally means to turn towards a ruler. So it's like, this is how you orient a society. I named it that because it's the mechanism by which a society becomes a state derived order.
Mm-hmm.
How long? I know you. How I put this? How long were you sitting on this before you decided coming out and talking about it on Twitter? Like, did you figure out why you were like doing podcasting on Twitter? Or did you come up with it, and then at what point did you say, okay, now I know enough. Now I'm confident enough in what I'm saying to go forward and actually talk about it with people?
No, actually, it was my first real innovation was the anti-tax. That was my first like revelation where it hit me of how, Lord, how can you have left us doomed to this this idiotic tax regime? How would you take this problem that seems completely unsolvable, and and what would you do about it? And then the idea popped into my head of basically what led to the anti-tax of, hey, you would use a sovereign wealth fund at the local level, because these things are basically old people that never fucking die. So they're the worst kind of boomer. And like local governments, I mean, there's so many of them. There's like almost 20,000 in the United States. And so I thought, when I was trying to pen test this thing in my brain, because I have like a hacker brain, a cybersecurity guy by nature, I should say by profession, by occupation. And so what I kept noticing, like, what would I do? If I saw this system and I'm a lefty, what would I do? And it's a really intense study of the left as well that came with it. And this is where I started to notice these patterns of this predation thing that they're doing. It's not at all random. That like there's a real rhyme and reason to it. And and there had not been any sort of economic explanation for it. So starting kind of around 2017, when I invented the anti-tax, that was when I started, kind of looking into the actual praxeology of archotropism. And it's been I had 2 of the laws kind of within the first year, and after listening to Dave Smith, I kind of got the third, and then the fourth. So that was been somewhere around 2018 was where I got the third one. He was talking about Hapa, and the fourth and fifth ones were probably 2019-ish, and 2021 was when I finally figured out the sixth law. And so I've had at least the first two for basically for about 4 or 5 years now. And they just came about as a part of trying to pen test and perfect this anti-tax strategy. And the reason I came out with them was that 2020 happened, and it was such a shit show. I'm like, oh, I thought I had a lot more time. How about that? Now the whole world is turning. Now that I figured this thing out, the whole world is turning to shit, and I don't have any time to do anything about it. So it's like, okay, now I need to bootstrap a new organization. Mises GOP. I need to bootstrap it over, basically the latter 8 months of 2021, and and into now. And so it's been basically about 11 months ish. And okay, now that I've figured this thing out, everything I need to kind of return turn back the hands of time using this knowledge, so to speak.
Let me ask you real quick. It seems like the government spent a lot of its political capital on the COVID stuff. The people are kind of distrusting of them. Do you see the idea the government is going to maybe not start a war, but accept a war? Because it seems like when there's a war, people fall back into trusting the government because it actually is, in a sense, defending them from nuclear missiles or other kind of nonsense. They claim it's defending them so they can rebuild trust in the government through a war, or would a war further destabilize trust in the government?
Further destabilized. The problem is that they need a real attack on us, and they haven't gotten that. And the best they've had is like an attack on Ukraine, which is like a strategically irrelevant, not an ally nation. And there's no and Putin's not even all that scary, and particularly because they made him out to be like a meme, for like the last 5 years. You're like Russia, and it's like though nobody quite takes Russia seriously anymore. They're like the boogeyman that wasn't, and and so they just can't. And they're spending their political capital and making things so much worse. It's like they're trying to follow the playbook of what you normally do in bad situations without understanding like the rhyme and reason to the playbook. They have no concept of strategy because they're boomers. And that's the way I kind of read this, is that they had a crisis. Normally when you have a crisis, you're supposed to bullshit the people into thinking you're going to restore order somehow. And that, not only did they not do that, they made it far worse. And it was like very clear they made it far worse. And so when you're really, really in a shit situation, normally what you do is, you subvert a war, you cause a war somehow through subversive and clandestine, and particularly clandestine means. And they didn't do that at all. Like you would do like a false flag attack on America is what you would do if you had any sort of strategy. But the idea that that you're going to convince us that Russia is such a big deal, when they're invading another country that's not an ally and is not a threat to us at all. And it's like, why are we bothering with this? And so now they're just making things worse and worse and worse for themselves.
So go ahead. Let me sort of counter a little bit naturally. Like you said, things are definitely going to get worse and worse and worse. It seems to me the plan is certainly that's going to be the sort of false flag attack. Is that there's going to be a pretty serious economic calamity. And then that's going to be blamed on the Russians, despite the fact that it's to people that sort of understand anything about economics and policy. That's not the case. That seems to be what the play to me is that they're going when the attack doesn't come, they're going to make the economic calamity be the attack, and that's what they're going to try and use to.
I mean, they're trying to do it right now with stagflation, saying it's caused by Putin.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, this is just like clown world level shit. Where excuse my French on a Catholic podcast, but
all good.
Yeah, I mean they're I mean, they're just absolutely screwing the pooch on this. That this is not going to work for them. It's so obvious that they're lying. Like I saw Nancy Pelosi come out today, like on Jeff Dice shared it. I'm like, I responded like, they're not even trying to lie all that convincingly anymore. Like, I'm old enough that I remember the propaganda campaign for the war in Iraq. It was way more convincing back then. And I noted that how it seemed that the more control that that the regime had over the flow of information, the better they were at lying. It's like they really put effort into it back then. Like like Nancy Pelosi came out today and she was like, "Oh, the reason that inflation is going up has to do with like greedy corporations and Vladimir Putin." And actually government and that and our critics were saying that it's the government spending because all the money we're printing. They're completely wrong. Money printing and and government spending what make inflation go down.
It was
like literally said all of this.
It was incredible. Like the quote was something along the lines of government spending decreases the national debt. Like it was the most absurd statement I've ever heard in my entire life.
It's like they're not even trying to like convincingly or coherently anymore.
I think you made also an interesting point that points to why they were better when they had more control. I think it's because when you have more control of the means of disseminating information, you could sort of construct a very elaborate lie and no one can gainsay you. Whereas if you construct an elaborate lie in the, let's say now, where you don't have absolute control over the means of the dissemination of information, someone can just go along and say, no. So you construct simple lies that are usually also, there's the Nigerian prince scam thing where they word it deliberately bad to attract all the people who would be filtered out, by it. So that everyone who buys into it is like is a legit customer or a legit victim. So there's also that aspect to it that, you go simple because it doesn't matter. We're going to pop it anyway. And you also filter in all your appropriate victims.
Yeah, but the problem is that, that weakness, with that idea is that weakness always invites aggression. And when you're doing stuff like that, you're showing how weak you are. And I can't take one look at that. I can take one look at that and say, gee, if I were like a corporation or something like this, I would be looking at them as, a regime that I would want to take over, like formally take over. And this is happened all throughout history where, if you were a really, really good king or who was, and by good, I mean moral, not good as in talented. If you're a really moral king who really left taxes and let the free market be the free market, what would end up happening over the span of maybe a generation or two is that you would get a class of banksters, money lenders, particularly, who would now try to either overthrow you or debt trap you. And, one of the two, and they would usually win eventually. And, they would basically be the banksters would always become the king of kings every single time. Like who won the Game of Thrones? The bank. And seriously, it was the Iron Bank. They won they won that war. And so like that's happened like basically since Sumer a lot. And so if you were a moral king who didn't really quite understand the whole consolidating power thing, eventually the banksters would overthrow you. And so like this is not so them being like weak like this and like really like projecting it. I'm looking around like, okay, who's it gonna be? Because the thing you need to do historically is provide more order and justice than the incumbent regime. And this was a common practice, it was popularized by Islam because they got to take over for Rome, and you can imagine it's a republic and they have really high taxes, much higher than monarchy. And you're coming in with like basically a monarchical conquest of North Africa. And the reason that Islam spread like wildfire is, Rome had like ridiculously high taxes on their colonies. And so Islam's coming in saying, hey, how about just 3%? And they're like, oh wow,
praise be to Allah.
Yeah, Allahu Akbar, Allah. I just say so. And eventually the Christians started adopting this, that when a king would take over, I remember this happened at least a few times in France, where the king of one city manages to you know, take over another city. Yeah, and you know, the people are like they're ready. The people and the lords are ready to resist, and you know, the king is dead. You know, and basically he's tasked with occupying them now. And so what he would do is, okay, no taxes for like 2 years. He's like, wow, you know, I'll hail the king. Long may he live forever. and so it's like when I see like, okay, you know, what's Vladimir Putin's task? How is he going to occupy the Ukraine? Answer is he's not. You know, the real answer is if he wants to just, you know, occupy them with no problem, he would cut their taxes in half. And you know, it's like, well, I mean, that'll work. and then he'll have a large anti-corruption campaign against them, and he'll actually start restoring order, because that's Austro-Tropism. Chaos demands power to be used against it to restore order. This goes all the way back to Genesis. You know, the spirit, you know, the earth was dark and void, and the spirit of God hovered over the waters, and God said, "Let there be light." And basically there's, you know, a juxtaposition of chaos that God applies force to create the natural order. And yeah, and this is exactly what life does. This is, I mean, you see this all the way down at a biological level. What does life do? It eschews entropy. It pushes it out. It pushes, you know, it has more chaos on the outside of it than the inside of it, and that's how it stays alive. Because once there's more chaos on the inside, you're dead. You know, and the whole reason you have death is that it's a cleansing mechanism that allows those resources to be redistributed to you know, life forms that are better at, or you know, at least for the present time, are better, have a higher production rate of order. So this is, you know, so this archotropism thing, it's not just like an economic thing, it's a biological thing. This is the essential action of life, is to produce more order inside of you and more entropy on the outside of you. And so the you know, and at every point you know, life is applying force to chaos to create order. And that's metabolism right there. So when when Putin is trying to consume or metabolize Ukraine into you know, into Russia, all he has to do is win the war, and then, you know, say, we're, you know, it's you know, again, it's a peacekeeping mission, and then to say, hey, if you come back, if you stop fighting, I'm going to cut your taxes by, you know, 75% or something like that. And you know, I think a lot of people would stop by and like, really, 75% reduction, deal. You know, hey, yeah, long live Putin.
Let's get into the anti-tax a little bit. Would sum up the anti-tax a little bit, and maybe anti-tax, and I know you want to talk a little bit about the Great Reset. So if you can kind of just go off a little bit on anti-tax and Great Reset, then we'll go from there.
Okay. And how are we going to tie? I'm going to have to figure out how to tie this into Augustine.
It might even be in two separate topics. But yeah, just give a brief overview of the anti-tax if you don't mind. We'll start there.
Brief idea. Yeah, the idea of the anti-tax is, okay, you know, how would you you know, get a government to cut taxes all the way down to zero and still, you know, keep its essential government services? The answer is that you would have a large network of sovereign wealth funds at the, you know, at the local level, not at the county level, not at the state level, not at the definitely not the federal level, because at the local level there's extreme competition for tax rates. Not just, you know, for tax rates, but for spending. This is why your local government is typically the best, because they're, you know, and consequently they're the least objectionable, the least political, because they do everything right. It's like when things are going well, you don't really care. It's when, you know, the federal government is a shit show and you really care about it. And that's, you know, I mean, it's a perverse incentive of politics where, you know, it's like, you know, they have, you know, the local governments have so much competition, and they're just so much better at their job by comparison to the federal government, to the point where they get no scrutiny at all, and you can do basically anything except anything that's going to make you uncompetitive, and it works out well. So most people have no clue who their mayor is. You know, they have much better idea of who the president is, because the president is the problem that they have to be solving, and the mayor has everything under control. And so if you put a sovereign wealth fund, again, like almost 20,000 of these in the United States, if you put one of these sovereign wealth funds in every single one of these, you're going to have a race to the bottom in terms of more spending for for less taxation, because this interest bearing mechanism is the sovereign wealth fund is a very real kind of investment strategy to that you are it's a real disconnect between the spending and taxation, because now that this is normally taxation has to be zero sum from predation, but now we've introduced a positive sum element to where not all of that tax revenue is zero sum, some of it is positive sum. And so the state is actually producing its own resources by capital allocation, which is a good thing. And so we've actually managed to make the predator productive, and through competition, and basically through substitution taxes, this thing can gradually take over all of taxation, not just at the local level, where it gradually substitutes positive sum returns from the sovereign wealth fund for the zero sum returns of taxation. It would and by the way, there's also economic growth at the same time. This whole way through, there's economic growth, so it's like a tax. You get to have your tax cut and eat it too, sort of thing. And so but at the state and federal levels too, you can do the same thing, where just have them pass substitution taxes on your local anti-tax, and that way you would have at every locality you would have different state, federal, and local tax burdens based on how well they manage their fund, and how productive they are, how good they are at creating these economies. And you essentially made the government a for-profit institution.
So just to understand this by analogy, sorry, Iron Captain, I interrupt you.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah, go ahead.
No. Okay, so just to understand this by analogy, imagine the state, especially the local state here, as a junkie sort of addicted to taxation and spending. You're trying to essentially rehabilitate him into a productive member of society by weaning him off of taxation itself, right? Would that be a fair analogy for it or not?
Kinda. It's more. I think of it more like the domestication process.
Okay. Yeah, it's a wild animal. It's a predator. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm taking it from like a I don't know, what was it, like an auroch, that was like the ancestor of modern cows, or like maybe like a wolf, and I'm turning it into like a puppy, or I'm turning it into a dog. It's like a wolf is a better from the wolf to the dog is probably a better thing, where this is more of a domestication to kind of tool.
Okay, got it.
Uncast, you got anything you want to add?
I did not know. I think there's probably a baby in the background.
Oh, okay.
So let's if no one has anything else to add, I have a question for Andrew. If no one has anything else to want to add to the anti-tax, Austro-Thomism, that kind of stuff, move on to the next question.
Actually, let me see. I did have one question, because earlier you, I don't know if predicted, but said it's possible that a company or something like that might take over, I think, the American government. Is that correct? Not take over exactly, but control it through like debtors, like they did to kings in some modern form, right? Because I was curious about that. And my question would be, if this did happen, do you think it would happen in a sort of revolution within the form where they try to keep the same formal apparatus going and keep it up as sort of a sham? Well, it already is one, but even more of a sham. It's the sham of the sham. Or do you think they'd actually change it formally?
Yeah, I think it would be a formal thing. This kind of the way that remember how Augustus did it when he took over Rome, and he kept the Senate around as sort of a vestigial institution. But he was officially and legally the guy making all of the decisions.
Okay.
And they were kind of just there to rubber stamp it. I think you're going to have a similar situation where because the Achilles heel of any republic is how incredibly corrupt it is. And so basically what corporations are probably going I'm just saying this is how I would do it. And I'm thinking that, okay, I'm 29 and I haven't been around for that long, and if I can figure this out, you bet that the smartest corporations on earth can figure this out, and they probably did it a long time ago. So the so they can induce the government to just be embarrassing itself all day long and just be absolutely incompetent. They can make all kinds of laws that just blow up all the time to where they're a shitty provider of order.
Yeah.
And so all they have to do at that point is provide more order, and that gives them the at least the moral legitimacy. And what you and because this thing is so corrupt, what you would do is you might hire a certain president's son to come be an advisor on your board, and this gives you access to the guy making all of the decisions to continue making the incumbent regime really, really awful, because whenever the incumbent regime is more awful, that results in profit for the corporation, who is now seeking to kind of take over that dominion and from the current regime. And you could do that with all of the presidents and congressmen and senators' sons. And the only people it doesn't really work for is the state bureaucrats, because there's so fucking many of them. There's 2 million employees. There's way too many. But so that's why you get resistance from like the State Department, but basically all of the elected forms are where all of the elected offices are, cheap and easy. I mean, they'll sell their grandma for a $2,500 check. So, and they're the ones with, more, and they do technically have more power. It's more difficult for them to use it, but they do have more power. And so they would, so the corporations are merely incentivized to, you just buy off the not just buy off, but buy in the legislatures into the new system. And then all you have to do from there is get the rubber stamp of approval from the Justice Department. And that's pretty easy to do if if basically the judge between you and the State Department, because the State Department's going to come after you, the judge in that case is going to be between basically it's got imagine like kind of the way Dave Smith says, imagine you and I have a problem and I'm going to pick the judge and it's going to be confirmed by my wife. It's like that. This is a situation that the corporations are attempting to set up right now. Is why we're going to get more and more right-wing justices, not left-wing justices. And I think and I'm going to make a prediction that people are going to think, no way, where this black woman judge probably will end up being a little more moderate than she's being portrayed as. She's probably going to be, she'll probably end up, I know it seems like she's a nut job, but she'll probably end up being, closer to a John Roberts than a Sonia Sotomayor. You know what I mean? Definitely not a Ginsburg, definitely not a Breyer. And I'm betting that's the way this is going, because, if I want to have a solid, right-wing trend, I need to have that rubber stamp, because whenever the State Department sues, I want my judge to, rule my way. And by the way, all of them, the new justices, they have all of them have a long history, including Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor, have a long history of ruling on the side of corporations, particularly when it's not a partisan issue. And partisan issues are mostly distractions. But the idea, here being that, hey, that, they're going to, be focused on the circus, and not focused on the corporate aspect, where the corporations usually win almost every time. So, They basically secured the Supreme Court. They're just, all they need is a big enough right now is the infrastructure for providing more order privately and cheaply. And then they need some sort of seal of approval from the legislature and for their new venture, that the politicians, family members are going to be well invested in, coincidentally. And then they need to have that lawsuit case with the, from the State Department and the permanent bureaucracy, who was directly threatened by that. And at that point, it goes to the Supreme Court judges that they've picked at who will, just rubber stamp it. At that point, the bloodless coup is complete. Hopefully bloodless. You never know with the State Department.
Yeah.
But but yeah, that's how you would do it.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, I was just talking about this with Caleb earlier, that our enemies seem to have shot themselves in the foot, because remember, the kind of justice that they're selling is social justice usually.
Mm-hmm.
So, I kind of likened in my head to, remember that verse in Genesis that the serpent will bite Mary's heel and she will crush his head. Well, I think of both the evil corporations like Disney, Apple, Amazon. They're all the ones I'm looking at as like people who would take over, for the regime. And the regime is also like really evil. The State Department is like absolutely, got like Satan.
Oh, yeah.
And so the way
I think a good way to Moldbug has a name for him. I think he calls him the vampire of the world.
Yeah, pretty much.
Or the arsonist. He said it's either the vampire or the arsonist, because ever sucks out of the blood out of other nations or sets them on fire. Yeah, continue. Sorry.
And so it's funny because I see them both as like competing serpents biting the other's heel. So it's like forget like they're not even biting Mary's heel. They're not even biting the seed of Mary's heel. Not even biting his heel. They're biting their own heel. they're like, evil seems to be that incompetent. Or that was just like a joke in my head that just from from when I saw it, and because. The whole idea, the whole reason they're doing all of this is to take over and start providing justice to the people. Problem is, they're selling the wrong shit. They're selling injustice, and because they're kind of idiots. So I mean, that's kind of like leaving the space open for anybody with a what must be done strategy, wink, wink, or like an Elon Musk or someone like that to just come along and say, I could probably do this better. And and so if you can get any sort of privatization of like local governments, if you could manage to somehow turn those into private corporations, if you had some mechanism for that, that would do it. That would give that would be all it would take to to at least begin the avalanche or begin the snowball effect, that leads to an actual private law society.
And Bevan, you want to add? Or
I suspect, unless someone else has anything else, I think this is probably a pretty good tie into what you wanted to say about the Great Reset, because I hear corporations trying to assume the authority to dictate everything. Like it's sounding a lot like the sort of thing that you would hear from the World Economic Forum or BlackRock or something like this.
That's exactly the people.
Okay.
Sounds like something Klaus Schwab would say while dressed in funny robes.
You will own nothing and you will like it. No, seriously. I
saw that.
It was nuts. Yeah. That was nuts.
That was really, really weird. That was so weird.
Did anyone else?
How weird that felt.
Did anybody see the anti-woke article? It was put up by Bloomberg. Anybody else read that?
Oh, I did not.
They put out an article called about the Gen Z's anti-woke movement, and about people who are like rejecting the workforce to stay at home. And you actually read the article, and it's about one guy who got laid off and moved into a trailer with his mom, and it's like he's like, I just don't want to go back to work anymore. I don't have any dependents. It's like, he has 3 kids. It's not anti-woke. It's just a deadbeat dad.
Man.
But if you read, it's just a story about deadbeat dad. But the article is sold it has an anti-woke movement from Gen Z, and it was really weird. Like it's an example of one of the Bloomberg talks about an article about like maybe it's good that Americans can't get what they want out of stores anymore. Like they can't get eggs or something. Just do less. Like it's very the elitism that they're having is signing more now. You can easily see it in the article. It's like the headlines are very stupid. Like he's like, wow, that's insane. It's anti-woke. When you read the article, it's like, no, this is bullshit. It's one guy who made a deadbeat dad.
I know I think there's an anti-work subreddit that's sort of blown up a little bit. That's
also, I think got destroyed because it for the infighting.
No, because also one of their guys appeared on Fox News, and I think a 3-minute segment or something, and it was awful. But anti-work guys were embarrassed and pissed that the guy went on, and everyone else was mocking them, and they kind of just went down in infighting. I think it was such another very weird instance that I cannot believe happened in the real world and is not confined to some speculative fiction for the science fiction stuff. I just can't believe it happened.
Yeah, it's like I saw that too, and but yeah, with like the Great Reset, it's like I think that's something that both of those, that both sides, I mean the corporate side and the regime side, have kind of missed, is that you can only fuck society up so much before before you have to make it better, and neither of them really has a decent plan of making things better. They just want to own shit, and it's like, who wants to own a garbage dump and have it, and not just like a garbage dump, where that's making you money by letting people dump their shit, but like just one that's just progressively getting worse and worse and worse. Yeah. It's like, I mean, it's like imagining wanting to own farmland so you can let it turn back into desert. It's like, that seems to be their attitude right now, and they haven't quite grasped that, the whole point of this really is to make a profit. It's like, I mean, that deadbeat dad, he's not paying any taxes, he's not generating any income. There's nothing. This guy's a pure cost to the system, and maybe that helps the regime take a little bit more power in the meantime by punishing the people who are making a profit. But that's not going to last. I mean, this is how, again, the Achilles heel of any Republican system or any democratic system is the corruption. This is why. And because you end up squandering all of society's resources at scale, and so eventually you get a guy who's just like, well, how about I don't do that? How about I'm maybe I can call myself Charlemagne, King of the Franks, and I'm going to consolidate like all of Europe under myself, and I'm not going to pretend like I'm like legitimate or anything. I will eventually, when I get crowned Holy Roman Emperor. Now. But I really, but when I'm conquering the whole thing, it's like, I'm going to kick the Lombards' butts, and I'm going to take all of their stuff. It's going to be mine, and I'm not going to make any pretense about it. And, when I want to finally make myself official, I call it my buddy, the Pope in Rome. And I say, that bitch in Byzantium is a woman, and technically a woman can't be Holy Roman Emperor. So, how about we, push something out my way? Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's a deal here. And, so the Pope understood, he saw the writing on the wall, and he's like, how about I I'll tell you what, how about I travel to France tomorrow, and I'm going to put the crown on your head. And, Empress Irene is going to be ticked like a month and a half later when she finds out, but, she's a woman. What's she going to do about it? Nothing. And except, and she ends up, she ended up, getting betrayed and overthrown later anyway, because she screwed over her son. She blinded her. She basically, the way you would, she was having a power struggle with her son, and she blinded him her own son, in order to prevent him from becoming king. Unfortunately, that opened the door for, I think it was the former emperor's brother, to come in and take over. I might be messing up some of the historical facts there, but that's the basic idea. It didn't work out for her. So, that, like, you could totally be like Charlemagne, like that, and instead of screwing over the whole kingdom, now that you've completely acquired, which is basically all of Europe, now you can just say, well, how about we run this thing like a business? She did, and then he screwed everything up afterwards when he died, because he broke his kingdom up, and he just broke it up into pieces and gave it to his sons. What he should have done was turned it into a corporation, handed them shares, and let them, collectively elect a prime minister. Very, very different course of human history if he had done that.
Yeah.
But he did it.
Let me go back a little bit, because you and maybe this is something that I don't quite understand about archotropism. You mentioned who would want to rule over a garbage heap, or who would want to burn down their farm. My understanding is that was sort of one of the parts of the principles of archotropism, is that the goal is not the generation of wealth for a certain class of people. They are a generation of power differential. It's this Milton idea of it's better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven. Is they don't really care about what they have. They want to make sure they have more than the people around them.
Exactly.
So isn't it very natural that this is sort of the way that they want to go? Is that they're very happy to burn everything to the ground if they're the ones that are left holding anything?
Yeah, they are. The problem is it only works for so long. This is the idea that underlies why the the devil is not a good person to make a bargain with, because he can't, he cannot not defraud you. He will not stab you in the back. And so he'll get, it'll work for like a short period of time, but because this is a high time preference strategy, which is like the strategy of the devil is always a high time preference strategy. Him as a high time preference person, his hatred for humanity, his hatred for God is just so much that like he can defer gratification on stabbing you in the back and betraying you and making your life miserable only so long. And and eventually he's just going to come back and come back and bite you. It's like an ontologically certain thing. He will come back and bite you. And and you shouldn't think it's like sometime in the far future. You should think it's like probably sometime fairly imminent. That's his time preference. And so, and again, if like you have anybody who's like, well, how about I just don't do that? How about I don't make a deal with the devil? How about I don't, worship Satan? How about I follow Alex Jones the way I'm supposed to?
Follow my prophet Alex Jones. Yeah.
Exactly, the Oracle of Austin. How about I, listen to God's holy prophet and Alex Jones, and
the new Eucharist is the oh my god, I had a joke and I completely screwed it up because I forgot the name of the supplements. What are the supplements called? Superman Vitality. That's the new Eucharist.
Yeah, Superman Vitality.
There we go.
He also used to sell water filters.
Oh, I have the water filters. Water filters great, by the way.
You gotta get fluoride makes you gay. That's all I know about Alex Jones. Fluoride makes you gay.
Yep, and that's why you need to take the iodine. And but yeah, so you can follow the guy who does that and actually builds all of civilization and has a much more powerful military that can kick your butt, because you've been spending all of your time squandering civilization and squandering your military might. And this is why the East has never worked. So the East, basically like the West is it. It's the only thing that's ever actually worked. It doesn't work all the time, but it worked. It worked at all. And the East has just always been a shit show. And because the East has never quite gotten this Augustinian concept correctly, because this is, again, so, if you understand that, when I say love, I mean, or I say order, I mean love in the Augustinian Trinitarian sense. And so sin is anything that is not that. And archotropism is basically, so love is order, sin is chaos. And so basically sin demands power to put it down and to restore it to love. And so they never quite figured that out. The East has just never figured that out. And so they've basically been stuck in the 6th century this entire time. I mean, they never evolved past like the 6th century. This is what, it never clicked for them exactly how love works. By the way, getting back to Augustine, all heresies, I'm not aware of any, or at least I should say, I'm not aware of any heresy that doesn't somehow stem from a misunderstanding of how love works, how Trinitarian love works, that it's this reciprocated agape model. You trade value for value, and that creates more value. Okay, so the Father loves the Son loves the Father, that creates the Holy Spirit, who's that bond of love, who's also personified love. It sends out its nature like that way. It creates things after its own nature. We see this again in the Bible, where it says, okay, what are the fruits of the Spirit? Love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So basically, we see the Spirit is love. Its products is love. It's so it creates after its own nature, and all of those other fruits are kind of, as Augustine said with sin, all of those other aspects of like joy, grace, and all that stuff are just aspects of love. Joy is that passion, that really good feeling of love. When you say I feel so good, I love this person, you're talking about joy. And it's the joy of love. Peace is kind of obvious because you're not in conflict, you're in love. And self-control is obvious because it has to be, agape love is self-sacrificial. And if you want to say, okay, so why does this create an infinite person? Well, you have two infinite gods who love each other and create a third infinite, not a third God, but but the two the persons of God. So why is it two persons of God love each other and create a third? Well, it's the nature of love. And this is it. So, and you would never figure this out kind of by yourself. You would have to it would have to be told to you by revelation so that you could presuppose it.
Yeah. I think Peter Kreeft has a wonderful point where he imagines this is a way he introduces a way to conceptualize Christ to non-believers. Imagine a place where all the unbelievers and believer philosophers are having a debate. Then God appears in human forms and just says "boo" behind all the unbelieving philosophers. He's a data point in the debate himself. And so I just thought it's a very neat way to conceptualize it. But also, I have one observation and maybe one question about the Great Reset, if no one wants to ask anything else first.
Go for it.
All right, thank you. So first observation is that I think the state, this very small state of Liechtenstein, that most, I think, runs like a corporation, whose in fact leader is personal friends of Hans Hermann Hoppe, and who Hoppe helped edit his book, The State in the Third Millennium, where he basically advocates for exactly this: the state run as a sort of transitioning to a corporation. I don't think it's a coincidence that the royal family is Catholic, by the way. If I find that an interesting observation. But also, secondly, I'm reading this is on more in international politics and how it would affect the New World Order and the Great Reset. I'm reading a book which is a debate between Alexander Dugin, whose name is getting some mileage on Twitter. Now, after the Ukrainian war, he's more or less a preeminent geopolitical philosopher of Russia. And Olavo de Carvalho, or Olavo de Carvalho in English, I suppose, who's, I think, the most famous Brazilian conservative, more right-wing philosopher who had read Mises, had read and appreciated Mises and Rothbard, but stayed within a more traditionalist perspective metaphysically. Well, also a Catholic. Dugin, I have no idea what he is, but he makes this point early in the debate, which is published in book format. This is back in 2011, where he says, okay, so he believes there are free powers, essentially, which array themselves into free projects for global dominance. And I'm quoting here, which he tentatively calls the Russian Chinese, the Western, which he says is sometimes mistakenly called Anglo-American, and the Islamic projects. The agents that personify these projects, which I'm really interested in if you agree with his assessment here, are as follows. 1, the ruling elite of Russia and China, particularly the Secret Service of these two countries. 2, the Western financial elite, as represented particularly in the Bilderberg Club, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Trilateral Commission. And 3, the Muslim Brotherhood, the religious leaders of the several Islamic countries and the governments of the Muslim countries. And he also notes, and this is important to see if you agree with this or not, of these free agents, only the first one, the Russian Chinese and essentially the Secret Service, which runs these two countries, is the only one that can be conceived in strictly geopolitical terms, since its plans and actions correspond to well-defined national and regional interests. The second, the Western one, the financial elites, is more advanced, which is more advanced in the implementation of its plans for world government, places itself explicitly above any national interests, including those of its countries of origins, which only serve as its base of operations. And the third, the Islamic one, which I believe was far more prominent in 2011 than it is now, 10 years later. In the third, conflicts of interest between national governments and the overarching goal of a universal caliphate are always ultimately resolved in favor of the latter, which, though currently existing only as an ideal, enjoys symbolic authority founded upon Quranic commandments that no Islamic government would dare to overtly challenge. So I'd like your assessment on that.
Oh yeah, that's exactly right. That the the Islamic world and the Western world are both ones based on religion. Where in some sense, that the Westernism is a religion, and it's not not great, but it's basically distilled Protestantism, and Islam is the other religion, whereas the East is pretty much entirely secular. There is no real religious government there, and some people like to claim that that there isn't. There isn't. That's clearly just not the case, and it's never been that way historically. and so I had a debate on Twitter the other day about this, that Russia is a real Orthodox country,
really
and
hardcore, yeah.
like, no, it's like that. I mean, that's a very, if anything, it's very, very recent. That just in the last like 20 years, and only because communism was such a shit show, and even then, the government doesn't reflect it at all. That's not at all reflect an Orthodox sort of praxeology, so to speak. But it reflects just a completely secular version. There's no real difference between that and China, because if you look at like what are the Russia and China really both have in common? Terminal demographics. It's like, so yeah, it's a complete, and when I say that, the difference between a Protestant love is that there's a real overemphasis on the self, in that love. It's a very self-centered kind of love. That's why it doesn't work. It's why it decomposes. It started as one and now it's decomposed into 37,000, kind of like a decomposing body does, where it just breaks apart. And whereas the Eastern version is just completely broken. There's no production at all. And because you're saying that okay, because the Holy Spirit does not get any of his nature at all from the Son, which is not what Catholics believe. Basically they've said that they've said one of two things is true, is that either the Son does not reciprocate the Father's love, which is why there's no third person that's created, or that their concept of love is unproductive. So okay, it does not, or at least it does not produce after its kind, which is the Catholic version, which is the biblical version, that we see from the fruits of the Spirit. That, remember, the Spirit is love, and and love produces after its own kind. It produces fruits that are also love. And so when you have that concept of a trinity that is unproductive, it's an unproductive trinity, where the one person, the one Father does all of it. You're basically saying the king has to do all of the production for the rest of the people, and that's just like, okay, that's nonsense, and that's not how the system works, and it's not how it's ever going to work. Is kind of irrational, and it's just it's doomed for failure. And and you see that in their terminal demographics of these are regimes that are not going to exist.
Yeah, and just so if anyone is interested, the passage I read is from the first segment from Olavo de Carvalho.
You might want to spell that in the chat. I'm just
text me that, and I'll add it to the description.
Sure. Should I put on?
You guys mind if we take like a 5-minute break?
Let's take a quick break, because it's been an hour. Well, take a quick break, and we'll come back to this.
Okay.
Let me just. And we're listening. We're gonna have a part 2 on Simsano. So let's